What flavors are good with matcha? In this video, we're going to try and find out. We'll start by examining what flavors go well with matcha, and then we'll talk about a few foods that have these flavors so that you can use to pair them with your matcha tea. Before we get started, it would really mean a lot to us if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for future tea videos. We have hundreds of tea videos on all sorts of topics related to Japanese green tea, but for this episode, we're going to focus on matcha pairings specifically. If you would prefer to read about these matcha pairings, we have a great article on our blog that you can check out. You can find the link to this in the description of this video. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we take a look at what flavors go well with matcha, let's talk a little bit about the taste of matcha itself. Matcha is known for having this really strong grassy or vegetal flavor. It also has a subtle, natural sweetness and a creamy or milky consistency. Finally, the taste profile that makes matcha most unique is this savory or umami flavor. This savory or brothy flavor is something you would normally associate with a meal like soup, but not in a drink like tea, but it is celebrated when it comes to matcha tea. This unique combination of flavors makes it difficult to pair matcha tea with certain foods, so it's really important to follow this guide so you know what flavors are good with matcha. So what flavors are good with matcha? Number one, we have sweet. If you're wondering what flavors are good with matcha, you generally can't go wrong with sweet things. Matcha has actually been paired with sweets or wagashi for hundreds of years. Originally, these sweets were made out of simple ingredients like fruit or nuts, but once the Europeans introduced sugar to Japan in the 1600s, it made it possible to create many different creations, some of which are works of art. To create wagashi, a combination of beans, sugar, and a starch like arrowroot powder are used. These three simple ingredients, along with food colorings, are used to create the vast assortment of wagashi we see today. Number two, smooth and creamy. One of the complaints people get about matcha is that it still has a little bit of bitterness to it. Instead of adding sugar to the matcha, which you should never do, instead what you can do is pair it with something to reduce the bitterness. It's usually a good idea to pair matcha with foods that have a smooth or creamy flavor like white chocolate or ice cream. This is also why a matcha latte works so well. Once you know what flavors go well with matcha, it will be easy to create your own food pairings and matcha lattes at home. What flavors are bad with matcha? First, we have citrus flavors. Citrus flavors are actually not good to pair with matcha. When you mix lemon juice with matcha, for example, it can really enhance the more astringent components of the tea. This may be a good thing if you really appreciate these citrusy flavors in the matcha, but most people do not. If you really want to combine the two flavors, you have to use something like a lemonade that combines both the citrusy and the sweet flavors to balance out the spike in astringency. Number two, we have unsweet treats. In a very unscientific study, we tested matcha out with both a regular croissant and a sweet croissant, and found that the sweet croissant worked much better. It seems when it comes to food pairing, matcha just needs a little bit of sweetness to get off the ground. If you eat something too sweet, it may steal the show from the matcha tea, but a little bit is nice to counter some of the natural bitterness. We haven't gotten good results from things like bread or crackers as a food pairing because they don't provide any sweetness or creaminess to counter out the bitterness. Number three, we have rich, flavorful foods. Matcha has a really intense flavor, so when it comes to food pairings, it's generally not a good idea to introduce any more. You will find that flavorful things like rich chocolate cakes or fruit pies don't work quite as well as you might think. This is because the flavors of these two treats are really battling it out, and your taste buds don't know what to make of it. Top food pairings for matcha. After talking a little bit about what flavors go well with matcha, let's dive into some foods that you can either mix with matcha or eat alongside of it. Number one, we have mochi. It's hard to talk about what flavors are good with matcha and not talk about mochi. It's like these two were meant for each other. Mochi is a type of rice dough that is made by pounding glutinous rice until it becomes soft and stretchy. The rice dough can then be wrapped around other ingredients like anko or sweet azuki bean paste to make daifuku. The daifuku is then often topped with a type of flour. Kanako, roasted soybean flour, or sesame seeds are popular. This can be a great treat to enjoy alongside a bowl of green tea, particularly matcha. It may be tempting to think of wagashi as a dessert, but it really is more of a palate cleanser. If you're used to Western-style desserts, the sweetness of this may be pretty subtle. If you eat this alongside your matcha, it can really help to smooth out a lot of the bitterness without directly impacting the taste of the matcha. Number two, wagashi. Other types of wagashi are made with similar ingredients. The most decorative ones are usually reserved for special occasions like tea ceremonies, but there are so many more simple forms of wagashi like dorayaki and dango. Just as with the mochi, these desserts are designed to have just enough sweetness to cleanse the palate, but they're nowhere near as sweet as something like a cupcake, for example. This makes them the perfect pairing for a bowl of matcha. They can cut through the bitterness without stealing the show. Number three, frozen yogurt. Frozen yogurt is another example of a sweet and neutral flavor. With this one, the flavor of the frozen yogurt matters, so make sure you go for something like vanilla, as this will clash the least with the flavor of the matcha. One thing you can try is actually make a matcha paste and drizzle it on top of the frozen yogurt or mix it in with the frozen yogurt. This is an easy way to make a matcha frozen yogurt, and you can do the same thing with vanilla ice cream. Number four, Cocoa powder. Cocoa powder works pretty well with matcha. Just make sure you don't overdo it. Both chocolate and matcha have very intense flavor profiles, and they are very different. Matcha leans more into these grassy or steamed vegetable notes, and chocolate is more on these warmer or darker flavor profiles. These two flavors are at opposites with one another, and they don't mix so well together. You can, however, get away with a tiny bit of cocoa powder sprinkled on top of your matcha, and you will find that it may add to the richness. Try it out and let us know what you think. Number 5, white chocolate. On the list of what flavors go well with matcha, white chocolate has to be on the top of the list. White chocolate is made without the cacao, so instead of having this rich chocolatey flavor, it has more of a buttery and neutral flavor. This is the best type of food to pair with a matcha. Smooth and sweet enough to help you with some of the bitterness, but not too flavorful that it clashes with the matcha. If you like the type of white chocolate that comes with wafers inside, this can also work well. Number 6, orange, lemon, and lime. As we mentioned before, these citrusy flavors seem to clash with the matcha, but if you're a fan of citrus fruit, you should definitely go ahead and try this pairing. You will notice that the taste of the matcha becomes more powerful and the finish becomes stronger. If this is too intense for you, we would instead recommend going for the other food pairings on this list. Number 7, black sesame. Black sesame seeds are often used on top of daifuku, and these can pair great with matcha. The mellow, earthy flavors and subtle sweetness of black sesame is a good complement to the more vibrant flavors of the matcha. Black sesame seems to work well with just about anything, and matcha is no exception. Number 8, oat milk. Of course, the list of what flavors go well with matcha would not be complete without talking about oat milk. This is a classic example of the neutral sweet flavor mentioned earlier. This is why oat milk is becoming so popular in matcha lattes. It's sweeter than dairy milk, and it doesn't have that lingering aftertaste. Oat milk is not really a pairing, but more of an ingredient you can use with matcha to enhance the flavors of each. If you're currently making matcha lattes, try one with oat milk and let us know what you think. Number 9, banana. Back when we were doing a list of what flavors go well with matcha on Instagram, the banana actually won. All we did for this comparison is make up a tiny bit of koicha paste and dip a banana inside. The flavors worked great together, and it really tasted like a dessert, as if you had dipped the banana in chocolate or something. It is amazing to see how something so simple can be the best pairing, but it is again an example of this neutral sweet phenomenon. The banana is sweet enough to smooth out the matcha, but it doesn't have a ton of flavor, so the flavors don't clash. How can you sweeten matcha correctly? When you sweeten matcha directly, you make it really hard to pick out the subtle flavor profiles of the tea. What we recommend if you have to sweeten the matcha is to do it indirectly by enjoying a flavor pairing. This will allow you to continue to expand your palate while cutting out some of the bitterness you might notice. By using sweeteners indirectly rather than directly, you are able to enjoy the flavors of both treats without distorting them. Of course, even with all these flavor pairings, the best way to enjoy matcha is still on its own, without milk or sugar. When you do this, you are able to experience the full, natural spectrum of flavors just as the producer intended. This brings a closer connection between the tea drinker and the field the tea was produced on. High-quality matcha tea should have a natural, sweet, and smooth flavor to it, which is developed through the long and careful production process. After traveling around Japan for the past few years, we have met with dozens of farmers and sampled hundreds of different teas. We selected 21 of our favorites to share with you in our matcha sampler. With this matcha sampler, you can try 21 different types of organically grown matcha tea from all over Japan. Try them all out and see which one is your favorite. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any other questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until then, we'll see you next time.